1 o'clock, so I figure we can get the ball rolling with this session. I assume we are good to go as some folks are joining us here today. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Oops, just seeing a pop-up. Getting started. Okay. Again, thank you everybody for joining us for this session. This is Building Equitable Connections and Literacy in CS Education. My name is Adam McDonald. I am one of the regional managers for the Pacific Northwest region for the Microsoft Philanthropies Teals Program. I'm going to be joined by 4 panelists today. All these panelists offer kind of like a different perspective from the computer science education landscape. But one thing that all these wonderful individuals share in common is that they are all either teaching, facilitating, or volunteering in classrooms that are supported by the Teals program. So really kind of the goal of this session is to kind of utilize these different perspectives to kind of discuss the importance and need of computer science, but also, really recognizing the barriers to, equitable access in computer science. So for those of you that are not familiar with Teals or have not heard of the program, I'll briefly explain that in just a bit. But first, I'd really like to introduce our amazing panelists today. First up, we have Sarah Croston. She is a rock star classroom teacher at Highland High School, which is just outside Yakima, Washington, if you're not familiar with the area. Deb Koenig is a CTE director for the Snohomish School District and also a tremendous advocate for CS education. Chris Langer is a program manager at Microsoft and a longtime Teals volunteer since 2016. And then last but not least, we have Amrutha Gajar, who is a software engineer at Facebook and a volunteer at Ephrata High School in Ephrata, Washington. And kind of one interesting fact about Amrutha is she's also a former Teals student, so she's kind of really come, full circle to the program. So, to give you a little bit of context, unfortunately, I'm not able to share my screen. I'm not sure what's going on, but it can still move forward. So again, I am a regional manager for the Microsoft Philanthropies Teals program. For those of you that are not familiar, Teals stands for Technology, Education, and Literacy in Schools. Our main goal is to help build sustainable computer science programs, in the area and across the program. Our program extends. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Sorry to interrupt. I just upped your number of participants to 10. So you should now be able to, you probably will need to refresh your screen, unfortunately, but then you'll be able to share a screen.
Okay, let me pull that up really quick and hopefully it works. Apologize everybody for the interruption.
And Kimberly, same thing with you. If you refresh, you can come in and help as a moderator.
Okay, hold on one moment. Apologize, 1 second.
Okay, Andrew, I'm on now. Thank you. We have 10 screens now?
You have up to 10, which means you can use one of them for the slide presentation.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
Sorry for the confusion, everybody. It's my fault.
No, not a problem. I'm glad we were able to make it work. Thank you, Andrew. Let me pull this up.
And I'm Kimberly. I'm here to help you. I'll just be on the background. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Kimberly. I'm sure I will reach out for help if anything else pops up. Appreciate it.
That.
No, you're okay. Okay, let me pull this up really quick. All right. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. Great. This will only take just a moment. So we just did our panelist introductions. Again, we have Sarah, Deb, Amrutha, and Chris joining us. And then kind of right where I left off, we were just introducing the Teals program. Again, our main goal is to help build computer science pathways at schools, across our program. Our program expands, across the United States and also BC and Canada. And we're actually just most recently expanded into Juarez, Mexico with some of our Teals programs. This is really kind of, based on building a community of teachers and also connecting them with volunteer industry professionals who can kind of come in, help support the teacher as they grow, learn CS content along the way with their students. And then as they develop and kind of grow into this role, they can, transition into teaching the class independently. So that's ultimately the goal is building up computer science access, across the United States, and again in BC, Canada, and also in Juarez, Mexico, and really trying to kind of give underrepresented demographics of students really an opportunity to learn CS, who maybe typically wouldn't have had that access well before. So we have a lot of resources, able to kind of support teachers as they grow. Aside from volunteer support, they'll have, connection with the regional managers to help kind of grow and support volunteers as they, also kind of develop as their own kind of teachers and develop their own teacher skills. And then we are also able to kind of offer kind of both remote and in-person support, since we began in 2012. So this is just a little bit of background about the Teals program. We might kind of mention it a few times throughout the session, and just to kind of give you a little bit of context. And certainly if you have any questions, you can ask in the chat, and we can go from there. So with that, hopefully we can just kind of jump right into our conversation now that you're all a little bit more familiar with Teals, I hope. And so, I guess to kind of get us started, this is the YCS conference, and I really, am always kind of fascinated about people's, why with CS. So I'd like to kind of go around this virtual kind of table of sorts and really ask all of our participants to get started kind of these two, kind of essential questions. First, what was that first experience with CS that you remember? And then second, again, we're at the YCS conference, so what is your YCS? Really what inspired you to learn, teach, or advocate for CS? So, Sarah, I guess, if you don't mind, we can start with you. Feel free to kind of share again, like, what's your first impression with CS? And then also, why are you here today? Why are you here to advocate for computer science education?
Yeah, sure. So I think my first experience with anything that I'm like, the first time I was baffled by it was in college. I was a math major, and one of our professors didn't teach us how to do any coding, but then asked us to like generate things with it. And that was how we turned in our homework. And I just remember being like, I don't know what this is. So my real like first exposure and understanding of anything computer science based was actually when I started teaching computer science through a program called Exploring Computer Science and a Teach for America fellowship. And so I did that for 2 years, and then moved to Teals at my new school. And so the why on all of that is I went to a really big high school with lots of different opportunities. My town had a university in it. It was still rural. It was in Montana, so still rural, but lots of opportunity. And when I joined Teach for America and saw that like across the country that it was not the case at most high schools, I thought, what can I do to make sure that more students have opportunities that I had? Computer science seemed like a great spot that like kind of needed to, it was a gap that I felt like needed to be filled, and an opportunity that lots of students needed to have, especially in rural settings where they might not have access to that kind of stuff in other places.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Cool. Deb, you're next on my virtual screen. So how about you? What was your first experience, with CS, and then, what brought you here to the table?
I don't have any work experience in computer science, but in my role as a CT director, I deal with the high demand careers. And I guess that is my first introduction into the computer science career opportunities and world. And I guess that's why I advocate it. I think that every student should have the opportunity to learn about computer science, programming, how to do an app, what is data, how do they use it, and how do they create with computer science. Just in our world today, because technology is moving so quickly, I think they need to know what it's all about.
Yeah, 100% agree. And again, thank you for being kind of that high level folks who can help kind of facilitate a lot of these conversations and get CS in the classroom. So Amrutha, you're again next on my panel. So how about you? I'm curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. My first experience with a computer science class was at my high school, Woodinville High School on the east side of Seattle. I think I was looking for different classes to take to fill up my schedule, and it seemed like something that would be interesting because I'd tinkered around with making websites and games before. But I think that at that point, I didn't really have a good understanding of what computer science meant outside of that kind of narrow usage of it. And so that first class where I got to meet like software engineers who were teaching the class and like have a deliverable at the end of a project, and not just like a paper I wrote, but like a game I could make or like a project I could turn in. It was, I think like it really influenced my decision to pursue that for my university. And I think that it was just really like inspiring experience. In terms of like why CS though, I think a lot of it just comes down to like, that's where like the opportunity to have impact is right now. And I think that in order to build technology to solve like some of the most important problems, whether it's in like healthcare, transportation, or really in any of these realms, I think that building that fundamental like computer science problem solving toolkit, it's just one of the most versatile skills that we could like develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And great story. And it's good to know that you had kind of like those mentors that can kind of, help, get you excited about CS and kind of help, maybe establish your pathway moving forward into your collegiate career too. And last but not least, Chris, curious to hear from your perspective as well.
This is the point where Chris dates himself really badly. So my first experience, my dad bought us a computer for the house. I learned how to do all my type editing in WordPerfect and Lotus 123, if anybody remembers any of those. My brother and I ran a bulletin board service on our 1200 baud modem back before the internet was a thing. And so starting at that point, it became clear that, computers are something I was interested in. I grew up in Canada. We were lucky. We actually had a high school program in computer science in the late 80s, which is different now than it used to be. And so that sort of got me my introduction. For the YCS question, I totally agree with everything everybody said so far. I think the ability to give students digital literacy and an understanding of how everything that is, as we move into a more technically advanced world where more stuff is based on this technology, understanding how all of that is built, its capabilities, its risks, its benefits, is super important if we're trying to graduate students who can walk out into the world and know what all of this stuff is. And that computer science foundation can help build that understanding for everybody. Even if they never go into computer science later on, understanding what all this technology means is a huge benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Cannot stress that enough, Chris. That kind of draws back to, a little bit to my own, like perspective, my own YCS, to answer, the question, myself, when my first experience with CS was, largely about just kind of getting excited about it. If any of you were able to watch the keynote by Dr. Amy Coe, it kind of brought me back down memory lane because she was talking about programming her TI-82 graphing calculator. That was my first experience with CS. I didn't know how it worked. My friend was able to do it. And I was like, oh, I want to be able to do that. And then that transitioned to, having my MySpace page and just thinking had all these superpowers because I was able to use like CSS code. And, but ultimately kind of what brought me here to the table is, kind of based on my teaching experience. I taught middle school computer science for a long time. And when I first began, there was no curriculum, there was no resources, there was no support to teach that. So I was in kind of a tricky situation and having to reach out to my nephew, who was a UW student studying computer science at the time, and trying to learn what he was doing in his 101 class and trying to apply that for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And it was a tremendous challenge. And that in itself was kind of what brought me here and realized the importance of CS, and knowing that at the time there was not a lot of resources. And granted, that's changed a little bit, but one thing that kind of really stood out is that, as I kind of grew as a CS teacher, I really started to grasp that a lot of the kids that tended to struggle in other aspects of school, other classes, tended to excel in my class. And so, I really kind of learned, the importance of being able to offer this, not just because, it's needs to be offered and there's a lot of opportunities, but it also helps kids grow in so many different aspects, and problem solving and kind of those soft skills that you really have to develop as a computer scientist, that again can apply to everyday life. So that's kind of what brought me here and what made me kind of realize the dire need for CS education. and again, brought me here to today. So, thank you all for sharing those perspectives, kind of a great kind of, swath of different perspectives and different kind of backgrounds. And it's good to hear, what you have to share. So, really to kind of jump into our conversation a little bit more. Sarah, I'm going to ask if we start with you. Chris mentioned this a little bit, but, I guess from your teaching perspective, I'm curious if you could share kind of like, from your opinion, what are the benefits of learning CS? And, again, why should it be accessible to all students?
I think a lot of others spoke to this, but the amount of fields that require some kind of understanding of computer science is huge. I think about in the Yakima Valley, we're very fruit heavy. There's orchards everywhere, packing warehouses everywhere. And a lot of my students and their families work in those warehouses, but a lot of them are transitioning to automated lines, which means the most needed jobs are actually the people who are creating the code to like integrate those lines. And so it's really actually like up and coming in the Valley when I think about the opportunities. And a lot of my students want to stay here. And when I think about, okay, you want to stay here, but like, I think you can do like great, amazing things. Here's something you can do that's like, that I don't think you would ever dream you could do. And so I think like there's so many fields that it's so applicable in. But the other thing, and you kind of spoke to this, Adam, is I feel like it's a spot where my students who love math or love science or like thinking computationally can also be so creative. Or my students who love art can realize that like you can like art and also love computing. And so I think it just is it's like a great opportunity to kind of mix all the different things that kids can think through and love. And it makes them feel excited and like they can kind of do anything with that. So that's kind of where I've seen it be super powerful.
Awesome. Great to hear. And it's also, like if any of you are not following along, like there's a tremendous like a growth in the tech sector in Central and Eastern Washington, and just kind of something to be aware of. And thank you for reaching out to your students and getting them to actually like stay in their communities where they're raised. Because, often, limited opportunities means that people tend to migrate away from those communities. So it's good that you're able to kind of maintain those, in your area as well. So to transition a little bit, Chris, you've been supporting, again, a lot of different classrooms as a volunteer. I'm curious about just, some of the highlights and maybe challenges that you have, again, as a volunteer perspective from your teaching CS career with Teals.
So highlights, it's amazing the number of kids who walk in where this is their first experience with the actual development of the applications that they use on a daily basis. And there's this realization as they work through that all of those apps they've been using on their phone and on their computer, that they can go build that type of stuff. It's always awesome when you see somebody who walks out and goes, I knew I wanted to be in STEM, but this really speaks to the type of thing that I've been looking at. If they were thinking of going into engineering or math or stuff like that, this is a switch over from that, and they realize that this is an awesome opportunity for them. I think the one big challenge that we face in the classroom is I think that depending on how you message it, people walk into that with the idea that this is going to be as mechanical as saying walking through math problems or something like that, where there's a clear set of steps to follow. And so the unfortunate part is you lose some students in that process where they were not expecting this to be as challenging as it was, because the answers are not always clear. There's a lot of room for moving around within that. And so that can be a little bit challenging, is to figure out how to keep those kids engaged and on track when this wasn't exactly as straightforward as they were hoping it would be.
Yeah, that's a great point, and there, we can talk a little bit later about kind of that stigma that's existed with computer science education, and, some things we can do to kind of combat that. Just as a brief kind of, as I digress really quick, I do want to mention for everybody who's here in attendance, all the participants, if you have any questions, for the panelists or for anybody here today, you can feel free to add those questions in the chat. We're going to try to have a little bit of time at the end of the session for, asking and answering questions if there are any. So from that, I kind of want to challenge or transition a little bit. Amrutha, again, you have kind of a great perspective as not only, being a former CS student who's gone through the program, but also are now a volunteer. So I'm curious, I guess, kind of wearing your two hats as both a volunteer and a former student, what really, in your opinion, makes kind of CS engaging for students? And then also, like, what can we do to make it more, attractive for maybe some of those kids who might be maybe reluctant to take a CS class?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like when you're in high school, I think the notion of like a career feels very abstract to you. Like I think like for the longest time, I like didn't really understand like what did people do when they worked at a software job, like, and I think that like trying to I guess like show like have experiences where people who work in industry are able to I think explain the types of problems they're able to solve, what their day-to-day looks like, and like share those experiences. I think it helps like kind of bridge that gap and like helps students like be able to, I guess, imagine themselves in similar roles. And also like I think it's a really unique opportunity to like I guess like demonstrate that a software job isn't like, sitting in a room by yourself all day, like typing at a computer, but it's like a collaborative, creative experience where you get to solve specific problems with teams of people. And I think like getting like a window into that world, I think, is a really great way to inspire students to be a part of it. I also think that like it's also a really like it's worth emphasizing. It's a very good career path to have. There's a lot of opportunity for like growth, both in terms of like your learning as well as like your like personal like aspirations. And I think when you're young and you're trying to figure out what you want to do, I think presenting that as an option and I guess showing the types of like I guess like things you can do if you go down that path, I think is a good way to like set people like I guess give exposure where they may not have it before.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. I like how you mentioned, like, it's very abstract for kids. They don't necessarily know. I mean, a lot of college students, even when you get into first 2, 3, 4 years of college, don't necessarily know what they want to do. So, those kind of tangible aspects of showing the kind of what it looks like, can be really, really impactful. So thank you for sharing that. As a little bit kind of, change of pace, it's really clear, that there's, a tremendous and immense benefit of CS education. However, there's still kind of, many schools that don't offer computer science for a variety of reasons. So, my next question is for Deb. From your, CTE director position, and your opinion, how do we overcome, kind of the reluctance of teachers and then also kind of admins and kind of school, officials from offering CS education?
Well, I think Teals does a good job with that by bringing the administrators into meetings, into introductory meetings and involving them. I also think that there's more emphasis at OSPI providing equivalencies for computer science where students can take, get credit for science or math. I also think that they just need to understand that this, like everyone has said, this is the way the world is going. And every job, every career path is going to be related to computer science. And the students need to know, like we said, how to use it, how to create with it, how to problem solve with it. We live in the area of technology world here in the Northwest. And I think we may be more aware of the need for it as, some other parts of the country, but making them aware of the opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also like how you mentioned, like, getting, everybody on board. Not everyone has necessarily understanding of, one, the need for CS and, like the importance of it. So, I guess getting multiple people on board is, something really important from, the teacher to the principal to, support staff to counselors, things like that. Having them all have a grasp on, the importance and the need and also the opportunities that this can open for their students, I think is really, really important.
And I think, when we first started, people had no concept of what computer science was. I think they all thought it was math. And so I think it's really important that, our teachers go to the counselors and talk to them about their classes and what it is. So they do have an understanding or a better understanding of what is taught in those classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was on mute. Apologize. Perfect. So, as we kind of transition, a little bit more, talking about, the need for CS and the need for support for CS. Sarah, I want to kind of go back to you and just hear a little bit more about kind of your experience in the classroom with industry volunteers. How have they kind of come in to really kind of support your class and also your own development as a CS educator?
Yeah, so my first 2 years teaching computer science were not with Teals. And I would say I almost didn't bring that because I switched schools. I almost didn't bring it with. I brought the idea that like we needed computer science, but I didn't think it was like rigorous. I didn't think I was learning anything from it. It felt just kind of surface level. And I didn't think it was enough for kids to really get them thinking about like how powerful it could be. And so working with Teals and with my volunteers first during the pandemic when we were like teaching from home, the energy that they brought to like that experience for me and for my students was absolutely amazing. It was so much fun to start my day like that every day. And my students, they were like most of their classes, they only had to come to twice a week, but we made this one 4 times a week just to kind of like keep with the pacing. And they showed up because it was so engaging. And so for me, Teals and having volunteers in my classroom was meaning that like I felt like I learned much deeper concepts in computer science. And now in my classroom, this is my second year with Teals. I feel like I can answer a lot of their questions because last year I spent the time as a student, like, oh my, like, wait, how do I do this? Or why isn't this working? And I think it was so much fun for me to be a student and collaborate with amazing, very like engaged volunteers. I also think they bring in the perspective that others have mentioned with like the careers, like, hey, this is my job. This is what I do. And it makes it so real for kids. In my previous district, and actually this one too, we did a virtual career fair, not like outside of Teals, but having people say like, this is my job. I had one student come up to me afterwards and be like, I thought that was so weird. Like, I never thought I could do that, but they were just like normal people. And I was like, yeah, you are like, you could do that. And so getting to meet people who do things that these kids have never dreamed of doing, or they have dreamed of, but didn't think could make possible is really, really cool. So those are things that I think they like huge contribution to not just my school or even me, but like my community too.
Awesome. Yeah. And I love the story about you being like the lead learner and be like, oh, hey, I don't know, as a former teacher myself, it was always like, I was always like kind of taught to, never show weakness in front of your students. But, as I kind of, wrestled and showed them that, hey, I'm learning along the way with you, that feel like it kind of let down some barriers and kids were more receptive to like being willing to share, and work through mistakes, that they make, because that's, part of the process, learning a little bit about like accepting failure and moving on from it was kind of like the biggest kind of takeaway that I had from that same experience that you mentioned, Sarah. So it's good to hear that I wasn't the only one. If we could do kind of the other side of the coin, we have here, Chris, you have again been supporting classes for several years now. Coming in from as an industry professional, coming in from the computer science industry, how did you kind of feel more supported, and how did you get supported for kind of developing your kind of teacher skills, your teacher tool belt of sorts?
Absolutely. So I think one of the big things that we have both with Teals and then with our in-classroom teachers, we set up that system so that the expectation is that it is not a one-directional learning experience, right? The teachers have that classroom experience. They know how to manage a class. They know the right methodologies for teaching. And so as a volunteer, as long as you're open to that experience of walking in and going, I have an area of expertise that happens to be in computer science, and being willing to learn that other direction. My experience so far has been a lot of the people who volunteer for in-classroom types of stuff are looking for that. A lot of the people I've met were like TAs in college when they were doing their CS degrees. So they've sort of done a little bit of this, but not with that same rigor. And so both directions allow each other to learn. And then those in-classroom volunteers get a lot of career value out of that. And that's the other thing that I think is super important to reinforce for the industry folks is there are skills you pick up from those classroom teachers and the way they interact and the way they talk to students, and the way they present ideas there's a benefit there for us too as volunteers to expand our skills and skill set as a result of that as well.
Awesome, and that's great to hear. Is something that you probably didn't think about when you signed up for the program, is that like, hey, I might grow professionally and my own capacity as well. Something that's often overlooked a little bit. But again, we really appreciate you kind of devoting and volunteering your time to support all these different classes that you've helped in the past. And think about all the kids that you have reached. As you not only have kind of shared your wealth of knowledge, but also again grown as your teacher skills. So, I think, from a lot of these conversations and kind of some of the things that a lot of you have said, it's very obvious that, CS is important. We wouldn't be here if this wasn't a need. And so I think it's, kind of pertinent to really kind of talk about, where that kind of need is coming from and, some of the barriers that, still exist and still are very much prevalent in technology and kind of the STEM fields. So I'm curious, Amrutha, based on, again, your experience as, a computer science student, as a industry professional, what are some of the barriers that you've kind of maybe experienced or observed or like witnessed in kind of CS education as you've kind of grown through this kind of pathway?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest barriers sometimes can be like self-imposed, I think, because there's, I think like, you have to be a very resilient learner in this field because of how ambiguous a lot of the problems we solve are. And sometimes there aren't like, it's like, as someone mentioned before, it's not a math problem. You're not like just solving some like equation. You have to kind of work through a problem, break it down. There are multiple ways to approach it, figure out trade-offs. And I think that like that process and like being comfortable in that like inherent discomfort of like not knowing something and being able to still be resilient enough to work through that, I think that that skill is something that like even many years into industry, it's still a difficult thing to do. And especially when you're getting exposed to this like challenging material like really early on and when you're very young, I think that it can sometimes be a challenge for students where like, the first like fundamental classes, foundations classes, if you don't like immediately click with the material, it can feel like really intimidating, I think. But from like both like a teacher perspective as well as, I think it's important to have like empathy that is a normal process in the learning cycle and that everyone experiences that. And then like also providing that toolkit to be resilient to those challenges, like unique challenges of the subject matter, I think is a really important way to help overcome those for students.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really important, to think about. I will often share with the teaching teams that I support that, especially if they are offering a new class, you kind of have to balance that, sharing content, but also getting kids excited. It's not like a typical class where you run in, you do the work, and then you're out the door. If you don't have, the perseverance, like you mentioned, if you don't have the, again, the empathy to kind of realize that you're working with problems, like you will struggle. And so I often tell new teachers, new volunteers that, hey, getting kids excited and engaged and just jazzed about computer science initially is probably just as important as them learning the content. They can always get more comfortable. They can always, learn the content later down the road. But if they don't have, again, that wherewithal, that perseverance, then they might not ever really kind of continue on that path. So, thank you for kind of speaking to that, because, building that foundation for kids, sometimes it's really hard to learn those soft skills. It's really hard to learn patience. It's really hard to learn problem solving. And so, kind of focusing on those things, luckily, CS really kind of speaks to all of those different skills, which is kind of really, again, one of the main immense benefits of just learning it, even if you don't want to pursue computer science in the future. So it's great to know. And, again, like a lot of, stigma has been created around CS. It's like, who is, if you think about the traditional computer science student, you could probably all think of and come to the same, same kind of image. You have boys, you have, typically, not very diverse demographics of students. So, Sarah, if we kind of go back to you as a teacher and as thinking about your kind of role in recruiting students, I know you mentioned earlier that, like luckily you have, a lot of students joining your class, which is great to see. It's great to see that there's excitement around CS, but I'm also kind of curious about, either from your personal experience or maybe experiences that you might be aware of, what are some of the kind of the challenges of kind of breaking down that stigma and then kind of really recruiting some of those underrepresented demographics of students?
Yeah, I think in my context, one of the things I see the most is students just don't have like that connection with someone else who does that job. So like they don't know anyone, they don't have a friend, a family member. And so it's not something that they're super familiar with. And that unfamiliarity, I think, can be like scary for them. And so I think for me, as far as like recruitment goes, we've done a few things. The virtual career fair to get kids talking to people who are in those jobs has been really helpful. But really more than anything, it's just relationships. I teach almost every single freshman at my school and really hype up my computer science class because I do love it. It's like super fun. But that helps kids get there. And then my like teaching practices in my math class and the way I run that class, they're like, oh yeah, I'd love to be in computer science because I think they feel comfortable and confident there. And they realize like that means that they could do it in computer science as well. So a lot of students I've had that are uncomfortable in a math class end up taking computer science because it's one of the classes they know they'll feel comfortable with just because they know I'm going to be there. So kind of more than anything, it's just developing really strong relationships with kids, because I can try to do like more generalized reaching out. But if I walk up to one specific student and I say like, Kayla, I know you love to draw. Computer science is the class for you. And she doesn't really like any school at all, but she likes me, we can make that work. And so I think that that has been the thing that has been the most important for me in getting really like giant computer science classes. We have more kids signing up for computer science than any other elective at this point. We have intersession weeks now in our school. Next week, I'm teaching a robotics and programming class. It has 20 kids in it that are coming to a week where they could have off. They could have no school, but they all want to come. And I think it's just because they're super excited about it, because like I said, I try to hype it up a lot. So yeah.
If you can get kids to come in when they don't have to, I think you really need to give yourself a pat on the back, because I don't know that special sauce to make that happen in my own experience. But great, thank you for sharing that, Sarah. I think you spoke directly kind of to some of the things that Amrutha was mentioning. Having that empathy for students is often the first barrier, especially if they have no background or real kind of like personal connection to CS. So great work, and it's great to hear that your pathway is growing so much. And this kind of, the same vein about, kind of some of the challenges, Deb, sorry, I feel like I'm giving you kind of some of the harder, like unable to answer questions, but, when we often partner with a new school, often, they're either looking to add CS, right away, get a class going, get kids in there. But, one of the challenges that we kind of have is like also setting the foundation of kind of some of the diversity and inclusion practices that we really think are integral and want to kind of build from the ground up. So my question for you is how do we get like an entire school, including the leadership team, on board with some of those D&I initiatives?
Well, we're lucky to have kind of innovative, passionate teachers and volunteers, Chris. But the teacher is a math teacher like Sarah. And one of the first things he did was he got all the math teachers to do, the majority of the math teachers now are doing Hour of Code. So they, are able to get a broader audience for computer science, kind of like Sarah is for recruiting. The diversity aspect, I think I do more of a high level outreach, working with our bilingual specialists, putting things more in multiple languages. Again, working with counselors, going down to the middle school, and our teacher has gone to the middle school to work with their counselors to let them know the opportunities. So just opening it up to all people, all students.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I know there's no perfect kind of recipe for making that happen, but exposure is right. Kimberly, thank you for posting the hour of code in the chat. For a lot of schools, CS professionals, we're probably very familiar with hour of code, probably done it ourselves, probably taught it, in our classes. But that is often, a person's first exposure to CS nowadays. It seems like, the hour of code, getting a chance to just like code, whether it be blocks or syntax or whatever, being able to just kind of share that, hey, this is really actually not that difficult and can be fun and engaging, for students. And I love, Deb, that you're connecting with the middle school. Middle school computer science is, in my opinion, still very much like the wild, wild west. It's kind of all over the place, but getting kids excited, and as they filter into high school and high school programs, again, it is, really kind of the first step you can get, creating demand, for CS, will hopefully help open the doors for a lot of schools if they don't have it already.
We
Can
also,
I add on to this one a
we,
tiny bit?
we also started offering AP Computer Science Principles, which it's grown. This year we have two sections, and I think that is also a good entry. For diversity.
More of a kind of, for those of the people that are not familiar here, it's more of kind of like a survey of kind of computer science. So not as coding intensive, but you can still learn a lot of the kind of the really key aspects of the computer science industry. Sarah, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think one of the things that really helps with the Teals curriculum is they'll have like project specs, but my students just make them their own. And so as far as like, how do you bring in diversity and how do you include all students? Like the first thing is a nursery rhyme, but we just tell kids like, tell a story, tell us like about your life, tell me something from your home, tell me something about where your family's from. And it really helps, I think, like elevate and celebrate who each of our students is, and kind of goes back to that, like, this isn't like a list of steps that you're following. This can be about you and your, like, whatever's in your brain and your ability to problem solve and like whatever you want to create, really helps lend to like making sure every single kid feels like they're part of that class.
Yeah, sorry, my dog is having puppy dreams right now, so she's barking around. I apologize for that in the background. I have to just kind of nudge her a little bit. Absolutely. A lot of kids don't get an opportunity to kind of share their personal preferences, share their interests in school. Like I remember sharing kids and saying like, hey, you can make this program about whatever you want. And really the only thing that this one student was obsessed with was basketball. Can I make it about basketball? I'm like, sure, we'll do whatever you want. And just that kind of like seeing that light bulb kick on that like, hey, I have academic freedom to make my own kind of own project the way I want. Normally it's always within guidelines, and certain, obviously there's times when that's needed too, but that just giving students freedom, can really help engage them with CS and the content and stuff. So again, because they might not get a typical chance to do that in a normal class. I want to kind of transition, a little bit to both kind of Chris and Amritha. I've got kind of, same question for both of you. I'm curious to hear, both of your perspectives is, if we think about kind of, big picture, getting, again, a lot of underrepresented demographics of students in the door in the CS field. That's kind of, one of the prime kind of initiatives of the Teals program is connecting with students that don't have access or traditionally don't have access to the CS. So, what can we do to help kind of diversify the kind of the tech talent pipeline? Chris, I'm curious to hear your perspective first.
Cool. I'd say there's a couple of things to focus on. One, I think, speaks to what Deb and Sarah were talking about. Aligning some of our goals and the tasks that we do in those programs around the things that those kids are already interested in, I think is super helpful. I think sometimes we emphasize gaming a little bit too much as a way to sort of as that gateway into computer science. Not everybody's into games, and so people feel sort of left out of that a little bit. And so expanding that to like, here's the wealth of things you can do in social justice, in art and design, in core coding, if that's what you want to do. That I think is a big help. I think the other thing that we should look at is, computer science and application development and what we do in industry is a multidisciplinary task. There are coders, but we have UX designers, we have program managers, we have hardware engineers, we have a breadth of folks with a varying set of skills who all come together to build these things that you use in your everyday life. And so focusing everything on the only thing I can do is write code into this back end to run stuff is a little bit narrow sighted on what all of that set of careers could be. So expanding that to the, the thing or the skill that you're passionate about, there's still jobs in this industry that can use all of those other skills. And that, I think, is a great gateway to get those people in the door. And then they might discover they love coding as well. And then we can, use those other courses. But that feels like we make that tent a little bit bigger by including some of those multidisciplinary tasks in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's, I think, something that kind of gets lost in kind of the ether a little bit, is when people think of computer science, they think of coding. And if you take a CS and you're like, oh, hey, I kind of struggled with coding, they're like, oh, hey, CS is not for me. But that's just a drop in the bucket of what that field can open for you. And Ruth, same question, how do we diversify this kind of tech talent pipeline?
Yeah, I think that it's also worth, advertising that there are a lot of roles that are kind of peripheral to engineering where you can still benefit from building that same computer science problem-solving toolkit. I think my team at Facebook in particular is very interdisciplinary in that we have product managers, data scientists, and subject matter experts in various fields and statistics. And there's a very broad range of skills. And I think that depending on what role you take, you can kind of play to your strengths, but having that even initial foundational understanding can really open you up to collaborating with other people who might be engineers. So I think that showing, demonstrating even early on that there are multiple career pathways that kind of stem from this initial skill set is really important. But also I think in terms of diversifying the initial pipeline, I also think it's just a matter of exposure as well. I think growing up in Washington, I think we just naturally have an understanding of the types of industries that are present here, and it feels really obvious in some ways. It's oh well, that it's right there. It's Microsoft's in the backyard. It feels very accessible. But I think that what I really like about the Teals program in particular is this push for making this curriculum available in other parts of the country where there isn't this massive industry easily available to you or visible to you. So I think a big part of that is just bridging those geographic barriers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a lot of areas in the country, in the program, that just don't have CS education. A lot of teachers, if you have, or industry professionals, if you have a background in CS, they're not usually jumping into teaching, so access, and again, some of these rural communities, some of these kind of more kind of out of a metropolitan area, cities, these areas might not have an opportunity to get a CS teacher in their school. So yeah, we as a Teals program support rural schools like Sarah's. We also have volunteers kind of remote in, which luckily as we transitioned to the pandemic last year was kind of a natural progress, because we'd already been doing kind of remote teaching. So luckily for us, that it kind of tended to work out. But it's also great to see that once we're able to kind of connect with some of these communities and really build up that CS education in these areas, sometimes the tech talent can pop up around it. And as we've kind of seen it, to Sarah's point about the orchards that are becoming fully automated, now there is a demand for CS support. There's a demand for engineers, for software professionals who can kind of come in and support those same industries that traditionally, have been manual. So great to see. Deb, I have, as we kind of start to wrap up this session, I have, again, one more challenging question for you. Again, I apologize for giving you all these hard to answer questions, but, thinking again, big picture, I know to make CS education kind of commonplace in our schools, there is a need to connect with, not only just the internal, stakeholders that you mentioned, counselors, principals, et cetera, but also with kind of outside leaders and resources. So I'm curious for you, from either your perspective or maybe even your own experience, how do we build, inclusive and also equitable CS advocates outside of K-12, landscape?
Outside of K-12?
Yeah.
Oh boy, you did ask me a tough one.
No, sorry.
What we're doing now, going to businesses. You asked me a really tough one. I didn't have that.
I know. I apologize.
I just think connecting with businesses outside K-12. I don't know how to do that. I think Teals promotion. I think Teals is a fabulous program. I think parents will find that out. They have other business connections. They work in other fields. Like I said, OSPI is promoting consumer science or computer science, with requiring computer science to be offered in schools.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, what you mentioned is really important, connecting with businesses. I mean, again, Sarah kind of mentioned that a little bit. Sarah mentioned, connecting with, folks, who are again transitioning to, supporting the apple orchards, connecting with businesses. I know that from Teals, we've connected with other businesses like PNNL, who have actually adopted a school, and so they have volunteers from their business go and support, that specific Teals school. It's kind of like they own to an extent, that Teals school, and support them on the regular. For those of you that are not familiar with the North Central Washington Tech Alliance, they recently released a video. It's on YouTube, called "Opportunity Lives Here," talking about Central Washington and all of the kind of blossoming tech sectors and tech industries that are kind of popped up, and how they're outreaching to the community and to students. So if you ever get an opportunity, I strongly encourage you to take a look at that. And I see we're, kind of approaching kind of towards the end of the session. So I do want to give an opportunity for, question and answers, but I kind of want to leave you with kind of one final question. And that's, what is your call to action, whether it be for a specific, a focus of folks that you want to reach out to, or just kind of in general, what is your call for action for CS education? And Marutha, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a call to action for I think maybe teachers and parents, I guess, I think, is to build a culture around wanting to learn, and cultivating this I guess intrinsic curiosity and channeling it towards these fields that I think are becoming increasingly important. And I guess a call to action even to fellow industry professionals. I think I've been definitely trying very hard in the last couple of years to advocate for this program within my, I guess, work communities, and finding coworkers and peers and in my friend group as well to volunteer their time. I think that it has a huge impact, and we have this really strong community here. And I think making sure we're able to I guess convince them of the importance of I guess paying it forward and being a part of these classrooms. I think it really supercharges our ability to do that. And so I think those would probably be my two call to actions.
Cool. I love that you're reaching out to all of your friends. I do the same. Anybody that knows in computer science, I'm like, hey, how would you like to volunteer? Good to see. Chris, same question. What's your kind of call for action for CS education?
I think the biggest thing that we could do to increase the success there is focus on the interdisciplinary aspects that exist here, finding ways to integrate computer science and computer literacy into all of the other things that we're doing in school, all the other STEM classes, into your arts classes. I don't need everybody to be a programmer. I would love everybody to be computer literate and understand that this path exists for them, and how even if they don't want to program, computers can be such a fundamental part of what they want to do in all of those other areas. It's a tool for them to be successful in whatever path they'd like to take. And I think that will just naturally lead to more people who will also then choose the core pure programming method. But that computer literacy would be an incredible thing for all of us to accomplish if we could accomplish that.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Definitely one of the more kind of tangible, needs, for students. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. Deb, same question. What is your kind of call to action?
Mine would be to promote. I think people need to know the opportunities of computer science. Like everybody's been talking about the various pathways. Social media, TV, commercials, I don't care. Help me promote computer science.
I love that. Any way I can get it, share the
way you can share the message.
Yeah, that's important, and that's what, we're trying to do. And so I'm glad that you're on board as well. And then Sarah, just kind of round out our discussion. What is your call to action?
I would say it was very similar to what Chris said, but as a rural educator who wonders if I leave my school, does computer science stay? I wish it was in every class kids were taking. So whatever component of computer science they can include in what they're doing needs to be included because it's part of every single part of their lives. And with that, as a math educator, I know that mindset, stereotype, and all of that has a really big impact. And a lot of that comes from teachers. And so I don't know, teacher prep programs. Everybody takes CS principles, something, because it's going to be part of every kid's life. And so if every teacher has the background to be able to say, I know enough about this to not tell you that it's too hard, then maybe we'd have a few more kids who didn't think they just can't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you for sharing that, and thank you everybody for really engaging in this conversation. I feel, definitely feel picked up, by some of the kind of the positive, experiences that you've had, and the initiatives that you're taking. We just have a few minutes left, and so I'm just going to share my screen really quick to get it back and kind of elicit to anybody here, in attendance. If you have any questions, feel free to share in the chat. I'll give you kind of a few minutes to share. I didn't see any questions so far, but I did see some kind of engaging conversations kind of taking place. Kimberly, thank you for supporting in the background, and also saw a lot of kudos given to our different panelists today. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat. I do see some kind of connections that people and links that Kimberly has posted for code.org. I certainly encourage you, if you don't offer computer science or don't have a way to teach CS at the moment, Hour of Code is a great place to start. So feel free to share that with your students. We got a question about grants from Stacy. Oh, Stacy Burnell asked about grants. Yes, absolutely. Reaching out to find grant opportunities for your school can often be, a great way to, get CS education. There's lots of grants out there, and just kind of being able to identify them and connect with them. We do our best as a program to kind of share those grants as we become, aware of them to our teaching team members. But also, if you're kind of outside the program, you might not necessarily get access to that. So, sharing different grants, can really help you maybe either kickstart a CS program, or maybe kind of add to or build out your pathway going from there. So aside from that, I do not see too many questions. So just kind of to wrap up, again, thank you to all of our panelists. I really appreciate you not only just kind of taking the time to be here on a Saturday, but also just being kind of general just champions for CS education in your different capacities. Again, we cannot do what we're doing without you. Chris, Amrutha, Deb, Sarah, thank you so much for engaging in this conversation. And just kind of being part of the kind of growing CS landscape, in your communities. So again, we really, really appreciate all the amazing work that you're doing, and appreciate you kind of, again, taking the time to just kind of, share your own perspectives and experiences with CS. So, with that, we are just about wrapped up. If you would like to learn more about the Teals program, feel free to visit Microsoft.com/Teals. We have a ton of information about the program and kind of how you can bring it to your own school to support CS or grow your CS pathways. And then if you have any kind of general questions, I'm always available. My email is there on the screen. It's adam@tealsk12.org. And just kind of the last piece that I'm going to leave you with is that our school application just opened last week. So if you're interested in bringing Teals to your school, or see that you need support for Teals, feel free to navigate to our website and apply right away. So again, thank you everybody for supporting the session, and have a great weekend. Sarah, Deb, Amrutha, Chris, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Cool. Bye, folks. Take care and enjoy your weekend. Bye, folks.